Everyone, welcome to Bible Quest. We're glad you're able to join us this evening. This is the Thursday edition, and we're going to be looking at Mark 13 in a minute. But before that, hey Kenny, how you doing?
I'm doing well. It's good to be with you guys again. Carl, how you doing?
Doing great. Good to see you guys, and thankful for this opportunity again to be looking into God's Word together.
So just for those that don't know in our audience, we call Carl San Diego because we never know where in the world is Carl San Diego. Where are you tonight, Carl?
Tonight I'm in Indian Rocks Beach, Florida. Brought my son down for school and spent a couple of days here with him before we drop him off.
That's great. And where are you going from there?
We'll be in Charleston, South Carolina next week, visiting with some brethren from a congregation we used to have fellowship with. Then finally back to Pittsburgh the week after that. So won't be gone too long.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm from Charleston is where I became a Christian.
Yeah. A lot of good stuff in that town.
There's a lot of good stuff in that. I was taught the scriptures and all that. We won't go into that history right now. That was so many years ago. I probably can't remember half of it. So, Carl, what are we talking about tonight?
So the last time we got together, we talked about this prophecy about the red heifer. And really, it's sort of a springboard into this whole end times prophetic jibber jabber that's going on. I don't know how else to put it.
I like that jibber jabber. I like that. Yeah.
There's a lot of noise on the internet right now about the end of days and this third temple being built and Jesus coming back to reign through that third temple. And the text in Mark 13 we're going to look at. Actually, we're going to start a series today, I believe. We'll deal with his prophetic speaking about the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. And Mark 13 is the most straightforward account of that. You have Matthew 24 and Luke 21 that are parallels. Most people who are trying to prophesy end times will use Matthew 24 because it sounds the most fantastic. And it's the hardest for a non-Jewish audience to decipher. It's got a lot of Jewish imagery. But Mark, who was writing to Jews and Gentiles together, most likely in the church at Rome, uses a lot of Gentile type language. In fact, he explains things when it gets too Jewishy. And so it's easier for us to understand.
So
if you
let me interrupt you. So no one doubts that what Mark is talking about in 13, that it's the same conversation that Jesus is having over there in Matthew and in Luke, right? I mean, everyone is in agreement with that.
I'll show you verses that are exactly parallel. Good. It's just the way Mark handles it is much more succinct, and he deals with it in a much more linear kind of way, which is more like Western thought than it is like Hebrew thought. And then Luke, if we add him in a couple of places where he's actually writing to a Roman named Theophilus, a non-Jew, then he explained some things even further than Mark did. Mark understood that some of his readers were going to be Jewish and would understand, but Luke didn't. So Luke just tells them straight up what he's talking about. When you take the three accounts together, you get a pretty clear picture. But if you limit yourself to Matthew, there's some language that sounds fantastic. And if you don't know the Old Testament, it sounds really futuristic. It's actually just the language God's always used to talk about destruction and judgment, but it sounds futuristic. Mark sort of keeps us on task. And what I'd like to do tonight really is just sort of set up the study of this chapter by talking about context. Context is so important.
Oh, yeah.
Because people take these chapters out of context and think they're talking about something that wasn't mentioned in the context. Keep it in the context and you'll see the questions for what they were, not for what you want them to be or what you think they are. So I'd like to just look at a few verses from Mark to get the generic context and talk through those tonight.
Okay. By the way, so it is important for context because when we take things out of context, and I want to make sure we don't do that. And if anybody in our audience is saying, hey, you're taking something out of context, well, let us know. Bring it to our attention and we'll revisit and look at it again. But if you take something out of context, then you can twist it into anything you want it to be.
Yeah, newspaper theology.
What's it called?
Right.
Newspaper theology. When this war is happening, this has to be related to that, or you know what I mean? That's where a lot of people take it.
I never heard that term. That's pretty interesting.
But before we jump in, and that's a huge thing, even Carl mentioning the audiences that it's intended for. You know, I was 40 years old when I finally obeyed the gospel the proper way, and not understand. I lived 40 years not understanding that those books were written to different audiences and that those events were all the same. And I needed to understand that that's all part of context. I had no clue. No clue. I was on board with the newspaper theology because I didn't study the Bible the way I needed to. So that's very important that was mentioned. I think for those that aren't studying or want to learn how to study properly, that's huge to take into consideration.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ken. What I'd like to do, if you'll permit, I'd like to read Matthew's account and then the parallel in Mark and then the parallel in Luke. And you're going to see how each one narrows down the questioning, and it gives you a clear idea of what's going on. We'll do our study in Mark when we finally do it, but I think to set it up, we need to see the three texts in parallel, because Matthew, the questions that Matthew records sound like something different to us than they would have sounded to the Jews. When Mark records what was actually said, and then when Luke makes it even more succinct for his Roman reader, it becomes much more clear what's actually being asked. So that's what I'd like to look at, is those three texts in parallel. So if you're going to be following along and study with us later on, just be ready for Matthew 24, verses 1 through 3, and Mark 13, verses 1 through 4, and Luke 21, verses 5 through 7. Those will be the three texts that we'll be looking at. I'm just going to kind of read those straight through, one after another, and I want you to notice how they sound, and each one with a little bit different perspective. Before I do that, though, let me set up the overall context. Jesus has been arguing all day with the religious leaders, because the day before, when he got to Jerusalem, he went into the temple and turned over the money changers' tables and cast out the people who were going about making merchandising in the temple, and told them that wasn't the place for it. This was supposed to be a house of prayer, not a den of thieves. When he came back then the next day, the temple leaders came and questioned him and said, "Who do you think you are? Where'd you get this authority?" And so he spends an entire day answering questions. In the evening, as he leaves the temple grounds, they turn around and look back at the temple and they ask these questions. And so he's going to tell them that this judgment is coming on the temple and on the people who are running the temple. That's what the context is generically. So now I want to start with the reading in Matthew 25. Any comments or questions from you guys before I start the reading, though?
I have an observation. The Jews asked him, "By what authority are you doing this?" That was a good question.
It's a great question.
It's a great question. And he told them. They just didn't like the answer.
Yeah, they didn't like it and they didn't believe it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So he's going to show his authority by predicting the future. He's got the authority of God. God is the one who can tell both the past, the distant past that we couldn't see. He can tell the present and he can tell the future. And Jesus is going to talk about a future that's 40 years ahead from this moment.
Okay.
So let's start in Matthew 24. I'm going to read verses 1 through 3. Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" So you can see how that is kind of a confusing line of questioning for us. It sounds like they're thinking about the end of the world. That's not what they said, but it can be interpreted that way. I think it's legitimate to see that as a question where they say, when are you coming and when are you going to end all these things? Because he's saying that's what's going to happen. He already said before that if they tore down the temple, he would rebuild it in 3 days. This concept of the end of this temple. Now, he was talking about the temple of his body, the Bible said, but that's sort of where they're thinking. So he said this is going to be thrown down. Go ahead, Drew.
Yeah, when Jesus says, Peter says, when these things be and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age, that's actually three things. But the end of the age, what age were they in?
they're in the Jewish age,
Did they
and
know of any other age to come?
as the book of Hebrews, the Hebrews writer will keep speaking of the age to come or the time to come. He was thinking of the age that comes after the Jewish age. He was telling them that they'd already had a taste of it.
But that
The
was
Christian
after
age.
Jesus' resurrection. This is before he was even crucified. And they have no clue of what Jesus is about to face, right? That was always the big problem. They weren't understanding him. He's going to leave them and blah, blah, blah. So the end of the age in their mind, they're thinking the Jewish age, their age that they're living in right now. At that time, I should say.
And I think you pointed out, they asked 3 questions, but they're really only asking 1.
Yeah.
These are 3 aspects of the same thing. And that's part of the issue. People think they're asking about 3 different events. And we're going to find out in both Mark and Luke, they're asking about one thing. Jesus only talked about one thing. This temple is going to be destroyed. That was the context for their question. And so they are confused. What do you mean? It was the end of an era when Solomon's temple went down. They rebuilt it. Herod has beautified it. If it gets torn down again, that's the end of an era. And so that's what they're thinking. But I want to show you how I know that. It's because of Mark and Luke that clarify that. So in Matthew, they ask 3 questions that I'm saying are one question. They ask him privately, notice. This is not a public declaration. Jesus is not making a prophecy here to the multitudes about the return of him at the end of all time. He's making a private conversation with, we'll find out in just a moment, with 4 of his apostles. But right here, they're just called the disciples. And so they came privately and said, when will these things be? That's really the question. The details they're looking for, though, is when are you coming and what will be the end of the age? What sign is what he's looking for? What sign of your coming and of the end of the age? So that's going to be an important part. We'll have to look at that in a further lesson. But the idea of the sign, we'll talk about that. But let's go to Mark 13 now. So that was Matthew. That's clearly, even the fact that we spent so much time trying to talk through some of the language shows that's clearly the most confusing account for our mindset. We think like Westerners. We don't think circular like Hebrew writers thought, and we don't think in the terms of the language they used. Mark is going to sound much more comfortable to us. Now let's listen to how Mark presents it. Mark 13, verse 1. Then as he went out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Teacher, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here?" And Jesus answered and said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down." Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign when all these things will be fulfilled?" You see that the second question is actually part of the first. When will it be, and what will be the sign of it happening? When all these things, it's a much more generic kind of question. To the Jewish mindset, you have repetition. Think about the way that works in Proverbs and Psalms, even in Genesis 1, then being repeated in Genesis 2. And so they ask the same question various ways. We ask all this stuff. When's all that going to happen? We don't have to say all the details. We just ask it in a more generic way. Now, Mark is a Jew, but he's writing to a Jewish and Gentile audience together, and he's considering that as he's writing. Now let's go look at how Luke handles it, and then we'll make a synthesis of these 3 and understand our context that'll set up the rest of these studies. So Luke chapter 21, I'm going to start at verse 5 down through verse 7. Then as some spoke of the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and donations, he said, "These things which you see, the days will come in which not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down." So they asked him, saying, "Teacher, but when will these things be? And what sign will there be when these things are about to take place?" So again, both Mark and Luke really simplify the questioning. Matthew asked this question about the end of the age because if the temple's destroyed, that's what the Jews are thinking. Then we're done.
That's the end of the world for them.
It is. It's the end of their world, at least.
Yeah.
And everything that they know in terms of serving God centers on the temple. That's where the only place they can make their sacrifices, the only place they can seek atonement and the presence of God. But here's a spoiler alert. Jesus is about to erect a new temple. It's in people. It's us. It's the church. It's not a physical building. That physical building's not going to be important anymore. He's going to allow it to stand for 40 years, though, giving the Jews opportunity to convert in Jerusalem and get out of town before the Romans come and destroy it. But the judgment is already sealed here. He's saying this is going to happen. This temple is going to be destroyed. So consider all of what's going on in this context now. Jesus has been having this argument with the religious leadership all day long. They're challenging his authority. They're showing that they're obstinate. They don't really care about the truth. They keep twisting it and coming up with their convoluted questions to try to trip him up in a word. Go read the chapters just before these in Matthew 23 and Mark 12 and Luke 20. You're going to see all of this questioning. They are showing themselves not to be concerned with the truth. So Jesus comes out of the temple and says, this temple is about to come down. These people aren't doing God's will here. They're just coming to the temple, but they're not doing God's will. This temple is going to be destroyed, and I'm about to make a new one. That's what's going on. They're worried, though, about this physical temple because it's what they know as the centerpiece of Israel religious life, of Jewish religious life. And Jesus just tells them, look, this is going to be undone. He'll tell them what to do about that later. He's going to give them some more information as he goes through this. But the setup is this. If we miss the setup, we begin to imagine all kinds of other questions. Jesus is talking about this physical temple coming down. He's not talking about the end of the world. He didn't say anything about the end of the world. And I don't believe they asked about the end of the world. They asked about the end of their age, the end of these things as they know them. There's something new that's coming in, and thank God that it did. We're a part of that something new. And everyone has an opportunity to be a part of that something new. Only the Jews could be a part of that Jewish covenant, really. You had to convert to Judaism. But now, anyone in the world can become a Christian and be part of God's temple. So Jesus responds in private to 4 apostles and gives them this conversation. Later, when Jesus is talking about the judgment, those are public announcements. He's talking about that to everybody. Every eye shall see him. All these things he says, this is something for the whole world. But here he's having a private conversation. These men he's teaching are going to be tasked with going out and warning Christians not to hang around the temple and try to defend it. Don't be a part of the Jewish nation anymore. There's a new temple you're a part of. So you think about Colossians chapter 2 and Ephesians chapter 2 and Galatians and all these places where Paul writes describing this new temple not made with hands. That's the language that Christians are receiving in the first century. So they're no longer tied to that stone temple. The last book that talks about it is the book of Hebrews, written around 66 or 67, right when the Romans were about to come in and destroy Jerusalem and the temple. And the writer of Hebrews is telling the Jewish Christians, don't go back to that physical faith. Don't go back to the law of Moses. Don't go back to the priesthood that's at that temple. You have a high priest in Jesus. Come out of the city to him. It's a continuation of this same prophetic argument that Jesus began here on this day. So we'll look at that in more detail as we go through these chapters in future lessons. But I wanted to get that context set up because it's so important for the rest of this study.
Yeah. Excellent. So far, we just read the first 3 to 4 verses out of those 3 books. And we know that that's not talking about an event that's going to happen thousands of years in the future from Jesus's time frame, because he's talking about the temple. That's what he's talking about. And that's everything. So, but he also, I don't want to go too far off here and into, go to where you may be going later. But we also know that it's going to be within the time frame of certain individuals are going to be alive. He's
going to talk about it happening within their lifetime. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we're not going to go any further than that. Maybe there's more prophetic discussion that Jesus will be talking about 2,000 years in the future. Let's find out. Let's continue that discussion. But as of right now, we're talking about something that's going to happen. And history tells us that that temple came down in 70 AD.
Yeah.
Just
and not one stone was left on another.
To this day, they've never rebuilt it. They want to, and that's what all the discussion is that's going on in the world today. Oh, we're getting close. They're going to rebuild the temple. Well, how are they going to build it? Well, they have to build it with hands. Did you just say that Jesus talking about building a temple without hands?
Yeah.
Let's hold that thought till we go further.
Exactly.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Carl. That's excellent. It's a good topic. I'm glad you're bringing this up, and we're going into the detail as the scriptures has revealed it to us. Anything else before we close it for this evening? All right. Well, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next time when you'll be in Charleston. Kenny and I will still be here in Pennsylvania, but we'll look forward to seeing Carl San Diego in Charleston. You have a great night, both of you guys.
You too. Thanks, guys.